Well, friends, hey, I encourage you to grab a hold of the church app because we're in this series together. This series called Building a Non-Anxious Life, where for 6 weeks, we're walking through this conversation and wrestling with the parts of our life that bring, frankly, a lot of anxiety and a lot of this fear and worry and overwhelmed feeling that we have that frankly, is so very real, but ignored in a lot of our conversations. And so we've actually been working through a book series, and so they're all available on the church app. And so if you actually go to the church app, click on the notes for today, scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a collection of books there that really speak into the life of all of our conversations every week. And I encourage you, we're in week number 3 today, and so if you missed 1 and 2, I encourage you to go back and listen to them, because we talked in the first week about bringing things out into the light and the need to bring things into the light. Then last Sunday, we talked about the need for meaningful connection in our life. And such good conversation, so I encourage you, go back to them. But this morning, we get to lean into a conversation around the loss of control. A few months ago, I was out at a pastor's gathering out in Kansas, and I got to rent a vehicle, and it was the smartest vehicle I've ever driven in my entire life. And normally, I'm the type of guy that most of the vehicles I've ever owned, I have to manually change the gears in the transmission. All the vehicles I've owned, well, not all of them, but most of them have, always all been stick shift in some way, and I've loved them. The trucks and some of the cars I've had, they've all been, I love them. The vehicle I have now is not, and I miss it. I sometimes pretend like I'm just some weirdo driving down the road, right? And but anyway, and so I was in this car, and it wasn't a Tesla, but it had all these buttons and cool switches and just all the things in it. And I was in this vehicle, and the folks, when I got it from the counter, no one, told me what any of it, did. And there was no manual or anything like that. And I had about an hour to go to where I was heading, and I'm just like, let's start playing with the buttons to see what happens, right? And maybe that's a bad idea, right? While you're cruising down the interstate at like 75, maybe 80, and you're cruising down the road, and I'm just going to press the buttons. But anyway, so I'm driving down the road, I'm beginning to press all these things, and all of a sudden, the dash in this vehicle lights up green in it. And then all of a sudden, as I'm driving down the road, the steering wheel begins to turn on its own. And not like it took me off the road, but it started to follow the interstate. And I didn't catch it at first because I was driving, and then all of a sudden, the car was fighting me. Like, no, that's not where the road's going. But all of a sudden, it would take it, right? If I tried to change lanes without using my blinker, which is very rare, right? But anyway, right? Changing lanes without using my blinker, don't say y'all don't do it too, right? It's all of us, right? Anyway, it had these moments of trying to change the lane, and it fights. It would fight me and pull me back. And I'm like, this is insane. And I could control the speed and brake, or I could kind of set it up too. I never got that far in trying to learn all the buttons. But I was driving, or it was driving. I was freaking out because this is insane, and I wanted to push this to the limits. And so, just the kind of personality I have, let's see how let's see how well this does. And so I got onto an exit, and it was still maneuvering over, and it was one of those 25 mile an hour sharp exits. And needless to say, I about tested the off-road abilities of this car, right? Because it started to make the turn, but then all the alarms went off, and it started to go off the road, and But anyway, it was exciting, and it was wonderful. I was all by myself, so there was no threat to anyone else in the vehicle with me. But it was wonderful. But it was terrifying. As I'm cruising down the road, and sometimes I was out in the country, sometimes on the interstate, sometimes in the city. And I mean city of where I was at. And sure enough, it would just do its thing. And there'd at times be no one around me. And at times there'd be semis on both sides. And I would sit there and hope that this thing wouldn't glitch. And those moments of not having control, well, I'm sure that in some way, the creators and manufacturers, this is something that people will enjoy. For me, I'll probably never own a vehicle that does that because it was terrifying. It was terrifying that I would sit there and just hope and hope and hope that things would work out. And they would. I'm still here. But it was terrifying. No control over the vehicle. as it would just do its thing, hoping the whole time that things would be okay. And that's a feeling that we don't really enjoy in life, is it? It's fun maybe in moments when we're out on an adventure, but in everyday life, that feeling of not having control is something that we hate. And we can feel it in our bones, can't we? When a situation we're in, or a circumstance we find ourselves in, and we have no power, we have no influence, we have no control over to the direction or the place that we're heading to, and when we can feel every bit of it in our being, and we don't know what to do, we're confused, we're disoriented, and we feel it in such immense ways. Friends, we know this. We experience it. It's a part of our life as human beings that when we aren't in control of life around us, our body, it tightens, and it's almost like a boa constrictor, and it very much squeezes the life right out of us. And friends, I actually mean that very literally, because we know this, that anxiety and all these parts of what we process and face every day in all sorts of moments, sometimes they're fading or maybe they're constant, but all these things, they impact our energy levels, they impact our moods, our desire for connection and intimacy with our spouse. They impact our organ function, they impact the brain development that we have. I mean, especially when we're in childhood moments of immense chaos and crisis. It makes us people, as we grow up throughout our life, people who hate not being in control. And when we're in a relationship, or when we're in a job, or we're in some sort of moment and we feel like there's nothing we can do, we get angry, we get afraid, we're terrified, we're paralyzed even. And friends, understand that even as people walking with God, we deal with this. And we have been saved absolutely from past sin and for heaven, but there's this work of God in our life that we're missing out on, this new sense of freedom and joy and health. One that I'm hoping throughout this series that we really very much discover. We see in the Old Testament, there's this book of Proverbs that speaks to so much wisdom of human life. And if you have your Bibles, I encourage you to open with me to Proverbs chapter 3. I want us to read a few verses. Because King Solomon, when he writes this, as the Lord is leading him to write this for all of humanity, for all of time, all of us even today, he writes this in chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, then kind of skip towards the end. It says that, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity." They will prolong your life. They will be good for your health and your being. And they will bring you peace. And they'll bring you prosperity in life. And the fact is that the Lord wants to lead us through so much of the chaos and crisis that we find ourselves in, and especially as people who've given our hearts to Jesus, but yet feel at times that we're losing control in life, and we don't know what to do in those moments. We're sitting behind the wheel, completely clueless, completely lost. We don't know what to do next. Have you been there? That we literally, not like our 5-step plan was kind of like, oh, and step number 4 got a little tinkered with. No, I mean in the next moment, we don't know what to do. Life is so flipped upside down like a snow globe that it's so shaken that we don't know what to do. Even as people of faith, it's something that we wrestle and is very real in our life. And the fact is that our journey with Jesus wants to lead us through into a way that prolongs our life for many years and brings peace and prosperity into our life. King Solomon continues to write in verse 21. He writes this. He says, "My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace your neck. Then you will go on your way into safety, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, you will sleep. Your sleep will be sweet. Could you imagine that? Laying down on your pillow at night and fear and worry, anxiousness is not consuming your mind, but it is sweet and still and soft. Could you even imagine? Verse 25, have no fear of sudden disaster or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked, for the Lord will be at your side and will keep your foot from being snared. Friends, God wants to lead us. We've forgotten. We sometimes even get distracted, or we replace reality with a kind of fictional narrative in our mind that we forget that as people of faith, that faith is not just this abstract belief that God exists. No, faith is this inner devotion and trust in something. And as people who place our faith in Jesus, our devotion is to Jesus, and our trust is in his leadership of our life. In every part of your life. And now understand, emphasis on every part of your life matters to God. And he has wisdom for how you can live out every area of your life. So we are not so easily overtaken by fear and anxiety and depression. Understand, friends, I want us to capture this reality that our path that I want us to lean into this morning towards building a non-anxious life requires us to choose to have God's wisdom in the things that have gotten out of control so we can finally experience freedom. So we finally can walk in freedom. Friends, understand is that when life is out of control, we've lost this personal freedom, this individuality. We've lost our sense of getting able to navigate and do our way through something. And we feel it. And friends, as I've mentioned, this whole series that we're in is kind of being brought out of a collection of books. And in the chapter that leans into this particular focus, the author goes on to write, multiple areas that we tend to hand over and let get out of control and take control over us in ways that bankrupt us spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, all the ways. He highlights all these areas, but friends, this morning I only want to highlight together three that he truly puts in the front as core ways. And friends, I don't want us to miss this conversation ways that God wants to help us through all of these ways, because I don't want us to miss that most of us, actually scratch that, likely all of us, everybody in the room, not just like, oh, her over there, or him over there. Like all of us, as ordinary people making our way through life, whether we're just getting started or later in life or somewhere in between, find ourselves being very anxious over these areas. The first I don't want us to miss in this conversation is about money. In 2021, just 3 years ago, a poll was taken of a bunch of U.S. citizens, and it was determined that about 50% of U.S. citizens felt positive and good about their personal finances. That was in 2021. They did the poll again in 2022, just a year later, and it had gone down from 50% to 40% in just 1 year. And has continued to decline. There's no surprise. There's no surprise that when we look on Facebook or Instagram or the news outlets or TikTok or wherever we absorb information of the world, There's no surprise that we are in an economic, very turbulent time in the history of our nation. We're familiar with the time of the Great Depression in the 1930s and the Great Recession of 2008. And friends, understand that right now we are in the midst of something similar that will one day be in the history books. Understand that right now is a for everybody, very uncomfortable time as we talk about house prices and inflation and wages and starting incomes and all the things. It's a very uncomfortable time. And understand when we look to TikTok or we look to news outlets or wherever, they typically want to blame a political party. We're encouraged to blame the government. We're encouraged to blame our semi-capitalist economic structure. We're encouraged to blame inflation. And none of these things have helped. But understand, it has very much put us in a place where we aren't looking in the mirror of our own life. Because it wasn't the president, it wasn't the government, it wasn't anyone else that had a say in how we manage the finances that we have earned. We chose to buy a house that we weren't ready to buy. We chose to eat out way too much instead of cooking at home. No one made us go to Chick-fil-A. We were like, I really want to. I don't feel like cooking. So we chose to do that. We chose not to set aside money for the oil changes and the car repairs that are guaranteed. Like tires and brakes, these things that are guaranteed in every vehicle. Elon Musk has not invented a vehicle that does not wear and break down. Every vehicle on the road, whether it just was made last week or made 10 years ago or 20 years ago or even further back, they all wear and require maintenance. But we chose not to look into the future, prepare for them. We chose not to save up for Christmas, even though it's the same date every year, just, December 25th. We chose not to prepare for our kids' birthdays or our spouse's birthdays. We chose to swipe our credit card when we knew we didn't have the money for what we were buying. We chose to go on a vacation when we weren't financially ready to. And I don't say this to shame us. I don't say this to embarrass anybody or to feel like I'm beating you in some sort of way. This is the reality of all of us, is that we chose, in the midst of the great discomfort of our economic landscape, we chose to do things that were not all that wise, and we bring about regret. And understand, I love what Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. He writes this, those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense. They have nothing. Now, I love this because I grew up for a short period of my childhood. We grew up kind of near the country and had some friends that were farmers. And you could ask them how many cattle they have. You could ask them how many of certain types of animals they had. You could ask them how many acres of certain crops they had. And they could tell you right off the bat. They could tell you all of the details because farmers know the boundaries of which they're working in because they want to maximize the boundaries of which they're working in. But you see, what happens is we like to erase the boundaries of what we have, and that brings us into danger. Because understand, he writes, those who work their land, whether it be this big or it be this big, those who do not work within the boundaries of their limits have nothing, but those who do have an abundance. Not comparatively from this to this, but because it's what they knew they had. It's what they expected. It was more than enough because they had planned for what they knew was coming. And that's where the abundance comes from. Understand that when we walk into the grocery store, and there are times in college where we were newly married and we'd walk in at the end of a month and we had $50 cash in our hands for groceries. Have you been there? Remember when, think back to the days of when you were young or recent. Listen, those days where you got $50 in your hand, and it's pretty easy to determine if ice cream and cake is a want or a necessity. Now, for me, ice cream, it's hard. It's hard. But that's why the Lord paired me with my wife. But when you have a credit card with a $5,000 limit, Doesn't matter how much cash is in your checking account because you've erased the boundaries. And we could say, I really deserve this. I really need it because I've been struggling. And so we ignore the laws of reality and we ignore our future self. And we get hurt. I say this not to embarrass or be, heap on shame. The fact is that many of us come to the start of a new year, we file our taxes, and we ask the question, where did it all go? We made that much. Where did it go? Friends, we need to bring focus and God's wisdom into the handling of our finances because they are often the biggest area of anxiousness and anxiety and depression in our life. They are a wild animal that for most in almost every household, if not contained, if not managed, if not stewarded, if not controlled, will let to run wild, will wreak havoc and pain and sorrow. Most couples that I give counseling to, usually there's an issue in finances. Understand that finances is often where so much relationship and household tension exists in our marriage. It even brings stress into our personal life as we want to be with friends, but we're in this weird kind of place of feeling this regret and shame, but also not wanting to miss out. And so we are in this weird cycle. Shame. Friends, it matters that every dollar has a purpose when we begin the month, so we aren't surprised where it landed at the end of the month. There are all sorts of YouTube videos of how to make a budget, and we should not neglect, because understand, a budget doesn't mean that we sacrifice and are bare to the bone. A budget means that we have permission to spend our money and not regret it. That is the beautiful thing of a budget. Whether we make a paycheck that has a lot of zeros or just a couple, a budget gives us permission to go have fun or to go do something or to put focus into something and not regret it. That's the beautiful thing of a budget. And so I urge you, bring that sense of focus and wisdom into your life and allow God to lead you. If you're married, work on it with your spouse, because likely is that you guys are very different. In our relationship, if it was up to me, we'd have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and hot dogs every day. And we would never go out to eat. We would sew patches onto every pair of jeans and clothes we have. I'm that type of wiring within me. But Aaron's like, let's have fun. Andre, you're not any fun. So both of us are different, and it requires communication and working together. And for me not to be right, and for her not to be right, but for us together, for the dreams that we have together to win and be on the same page. Understand that a budget matters. If there's payments in your life, it's hard to get ahead when you're still trying to pay for a mattress you bought last year. When you're linked by chains to something of the past, it's hard to get ahead. So don't ignore them. Whether it be mattress or a lawnmower or student loans, don't ignore them. They matter, are an important part of building a foundation of right now in the season of where you are, not comparing to anybody. Understand, I am not a doomsday person, and I am not a conspiracy theorist. But understand the season of landscape that we are in right now in our nation, it is not going to get better anytime soon. It's a very important fact that we wake up and see. Whether we're in our 20s or we're later in life, it doesn't matter what president gets brought in later this year. It doesn't matter if we try to raise income. Understand nothing is going to change overnight. And understand there are even some economists out there who are probably very doomsday people who write things are crashing fast. And we shouldn't operate by fear. We should never operate by fear, but by facts. Understand one of the facts we must face is things are probably not going to get better at the end of the year or even at the end of perhaps even the next couple of years. So it matters that we have a firm foundation now. Friends, I don't want us to miss the conversation around money because it's a huge part of our life. The second area that often brings a lot of rather chaos and allow their anxiousness into our life is clutter. In August of 2009, the TV show Hoarders aired for the very first time. Any fans who love to watch that show or watched it and are obsessed with it? Anybody? A few? You see, what's fascinating is that show aired in 2009, and it ran for just over 15 seasons. Like, wow. It ran for and even reruns today, and all sorts of spin-offs and other types of shows have aired that are just like it. We love that show as a nation because it resembles all of us. Fascinating is that every one of us has a grandparent or a great-grandparent that lived during the Great Depression. It wasn't that long ago. And they brought about a way of life that has continued to be passed on from generation to generation to generation. And it's a mindset and an attitude that nothing ever gets thrown away. It gets reused, it gets repurposed, it gets held on to. Every nail, every screw gets kept in a coffee can in the shed. Clothes are patched and sewn and hand-me down and passed down to other kids or people in the family or friends. Every scrap of wood gets held on to because it might have a purpose someday. I loved walking into my grandpa's workshop, and there was pieces of wood there that were there my entire childhood that were never touched or used for anything. But he always had the same saying, I might use it someday. It's a part of our life, and it's been passed down. And take this mentality and combine it with today's consumer-driven stuff, consumed, crazied people of this generation and of this day and time. And we are people consumed with so many things that it's suffocating us in ways. Understand that every single item in your house is sending a message to you. Hopefully not hopefully it's not talking to you, but every item in our house sends a nonverbal message, everybody, but it speaks a message into our mind that it needs our attention, that it has a to-do list of its own. And so when we see every pair of shoes that's not put in the closet, I got to organize that. Or when we do open the closet and we see all these clothes and barely any room to fit another one, I got to one day go through that. Every piece of laundry that's perhaps put on the floor, right? Or ladies, sorry if you just tensed when you heard me say that. But every piece of laundry that's put somewhere in the house needs to be folded. It's there in your mind when you see dirty dishes. I got to get to it. Or the trash is full. Got to get to it. The lawn needs to be mowed. Or man, I walk into the shed and it's covered and it's so unorganized. Or we go into our garages and it's just all just a hurricane went off in there. All these things speak into our mind that they need our attention. It's not just in our homes. We have storage units. We have all these things, all this stuff in the attic, in the closet, in the basement if we have one, wherever it is, at our friend's house, at our parents' house. It needs attention, and it's there. It's there, telling us that it needs our attention, and we have to do something about it. And friends, understand that our clutter wreaks a havoc into our mind. And I don't want us to miss something that Jesus shared. When he shared this, he wasn't speaking to clutter. He was speaking to the way of our human life. He says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, where thieves break in and steal. And he continues to write, it's not on the screen, he continues to write, store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy, where thieves cannot break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there your heart is also. Where our treasure is, there we are too. And we're in this weird crossroads where we're worried if we throw away something or get rid of something that will somehow get rid of a piece of us. If we get rid of the workout equipment that is staring us in the face that we used one time, which is of course not of us, right? We're afraid that if we throw away the clothes that don't fit anymore, somehow we will lose who we hope to be even someday. And even a part of us where we have, taken on and things that have been passed down into us from our parents or grandparents who have passed. Now we have this inner wrestling of what do we do with these things that are given to us by loved ones who are no longer here. Understand, it's one thing to put them on display and have meaningful presence in your life, but there's another thing for it to just sit in the closet that's already packed, or sit in the storage unit that's already packed, or sit somewhere that's already packed, and just to sit there because we're too afraid to deal with it. And every time we see it, it's all brought back up. Understand, we're afraid even to donate or pass some of these things on because we're afraid that perhaps even we might lose connection with our loved ones in some way. Our connection with our loved ones who are gone are in here, not in old clothes or not in old things. Understand, we put so much of ourself into things that we become people who hold on. And it brings about this chaos in our mind and in our life that we just kind of kick the can down the road, and one day I'll deal with it. Friends, I encourage you, with whatever season of life you're in, or even in your daily rhythms, attack the clutter. Bring God's wisdom into what to deal with the more complicated things like items that have been passed on to you from loved ones who are gone. But bring focus and organization into every part of your life, whether it be at home or it be in the office or wherever it is. Because when things are organized and simple, even if there's a chaos that like we're used to, it still brings about distress in us. Friends, the third area that the writer of the book highlights is one regarding time and rest. I find it interesting in our culture today that we can tell our kids to go out and have fun and go play, and maybe they do, and they don't hopefully fight back too much. But you tell adults to put that down and go relax, and they fight back. What's fascinating is that when God rescued his people from Egypt, literally they, Moses and all of them, they crossed the Red Sea, and they're not even to Mount Sinai where they get the Ten Commandments. They're not even at that part yet. But understand, the very first command that God gives his people is not put me first, and it's not don't kill each other. It's Sabbath. It's rest. It's rest in a way that fills their soul. Because all their life, all they had ever done was work. They had been turned from human beings into animals. And God was trying to restore their humanity by reminding them that their value, their worth, their dignity is not found in what they can do. Understand is that today in our culture, we are told to rest, to slow down and relax. And when we ignore it, we are erasing our humanity and the things that make us human. And understand, people reach burnout not because they're tired, but because they are trying to be something that they were not made to be. Understand, let me say that again. People reach burnout not because they are tired, but because I, in trying to be something that I was not made to be or to do, is an important fact of our humanity, the way that God has made us, that we cannot ignore for another minute. Because we have gone on to try to gain the world, and we have lost our souls. We are inclined to sacrifice and to bleed and to give up of ourselves for an achievement or for something, for more overtime, for a bigger paycheck, for whatever it is. But understand, when we place ourselves on the self-sacrificing altar, we are not there alone. We bring with us our kids. We bring with us our spouse, our friends, who are tied and connected to us. And when they lose us, it brings chaos and pain and hurt into their life. In his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, Pastor John Mark Comer emphasizes our need to restore what God has made so clear about finding our true humanity. Not in what we can accomplish or work or achieve or how tired we can be. It's about being who God has made us to be. And what I love that he emphasizes is that we have to return to being bored. We have to tell our kids again, when they're in the car, to look out the window and watch the raindrops race each other and count the trees, the mailboxes. We have to actually return home from Sunday after church and maybe don't race to turn the TV or watch the game, but to just sit and pause and go slow and listen. To not race to laundry, to not race to do dishes or clean the home, to not race to do more things or to go to work, but to slow down and allow the Lord to fill our soul. Not rest that is just us not working. This kind of rest is rest that fills our soul. Friends, we must reclaim it. Friends, these are just a few areas of our life that often are left to their own selves, and they quickly get out of control, and we lose them, and we feel it into our bones. And friends, there are many more. There are many more. And I do not want us to miss an overarching theme of our conversation, is that as we're in this journey of wanting to gain control and find freedom again, we have to be people who are hungry for wisdom. Proverbs 28:6 says, "Those who trust in their own insights are foolish, but anyone who walks in wisdom is safe." We have to be hungry for wisdom, wisdom from the Lord. There are 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs. Read a chapter every day for the next month. Understand that we have to be people who say, "The Lord, teach me your ways. Don't let me fall into my own insight or my own ideas of truth or my own ideas of what's right. Lord, teach me your ways." We have to be hungry for wisdom from God again. We have to beg for the Holy Spirit to lead us into self-control and build up inside of us self-control. Understand that when Paul writes Galatians and he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, self-control is one of them. Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. Understand that when people are as disciples of Jesus, we should have self-control that doesn't come from because we were born as a disciplined person, as that our internal strength is strong. No, we should be strong because the Holy Spirit is present in our life, and we should beg every day, "Holy Spirit, lead me into self-control because I'm walking by the ice cream aisle. Lord, lead me to self-control because I'm here right now in this place, and I want to be wise in my money. I want to be wise in my relationships. I want to be wise at work. Lord, I want to be wise in all this stuff. Lord, give me self-control because if left to my own ways, I am a person who is without self-control, and I'm like a city whose walls that have broken down. Lord, make me this way." And we have to be people who start being sick and tired of how things are. Proverbs 26:11, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats himself." Things aren't going to be different until you decide that something needs to change. And in all the areas, whether it be what we talked about with money and clutter and time, or it be something entirely different, nothing will change until you in your own self say, "I don't like this anymore. I don't like fighting with my spouse about money. I hate it. I don't enjoy coming home and missing time with my kids. I don't enjoy this." Something has got to change. Friends, the Lord wants to lead you in that. He wants to lead you. That's where freedom comes real in our life. And we get to have what King Solomon talked about, a life with prolonged years, a life with peace and prosperity. Friends, I encourage you. Say, "Lord, light a fire in me." Because we are people, this is just true about our human nature. We are people who are not easily motivated towards the right thing. Motivation is always present. There's no such thing as an unmotivated person. We're just motivated towards the wrong thing. Motivated towards fear. Towards something else. But Lord, light a fire in me and motivate me to change these parts of my life that would bless me and bless my kids and bless our marriage and bless our life. When we close our eyes together.